August 9, 1945. A single American bomber, the Boxcar, released an atomic bomb over the city of Nagasaki, Japan. By the end of that year, more than 70,000 lives had been lost. And yet, when asked later, the men who dropped the bomb did not speak of guilt or horror. Instead, the pilot, Major Charles Sweeney, calmly explained, "It was my mission. I was ordered to carry it out, and I have no regrets." Another crewman explained, "I honestly believe the bomb saved lives in the long run. No guilt, no hesitation, just duty." And that raises a terrifying question. How can ordinary men who once laughed with friends and kissed their children goodnight carry out actions that wipe out entire cities and feel no remorse? The answer doesn't lie in evil intentions. It lies in something far more unsettling: the science of obedience, conditioning, and psychological control. Because military training doesn't simply build discipline, it reshapes the human mind itself. It suppresses doubt, weakens empathy, and makes people obey orders they would otherwise never follow. A study in the Journal of Military Psychology found that intense combat training actually reduces cognitive flexibility, the brain's ability to think creatively, adapt to new information, and question authority. When tested, soldiers who had gone through high-stress, repetitive drills performed significantly worse in problem-solving than civilians. Neuroscience confirms it. Research in the Journal of Traumatic Stress shows that prolonged exposure to military-style stress literally rewires the brain. The amygdala, the fear center, grows hyperactive. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, morality, and reflection, gets suppressed. In plain words, military training reshapes the brain to prioritize obedience over critical thought. Studies show young veterans, especially between 18 and 24, face nearly double the unemployment rate of their civilian peers. Why? Because employers value independence and decision-making, skills often dulled by military conditioning. Psychologist Philip Zimbardo, infamous for the Stanford prison experiment, put it bluntly, "The system doesn't want independent thinkers. It wants people trained to obey instantly, without hesitation." That's how armies function. So when we hear the voices of the men who dropped the atomic bomb, calm and detached, we're not listening to monsters. We're listening to ordinary men, reshaped by a system designed to strip away doubt and replace it with unquestioning obedience. History shows us that even intelligent, compassionate people can be pushed into blind obedience. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most disturbing studies of all time. Ordinary volunteers were told to deliver electric shocks to a stranger whenever they made mistakes. With each error, the shocks got stronger. The screams got louder. But here's the catch. The shocks weren't real. The screams were staged. And yet, 65% of participants continued to the highest voltage, simply because a man in a white coat told them to. The lesson? Most of us under pressure will obey authority, even when it means harming another human being. Psychologist Albert Bandura once explained, "Moral disengagement allows people to participate in acts they would otherwise find unthinkable." This is the hidden science of obedience, not sharpening the mind, but systematically breaking it, until obedience becomes stronger than morality. Obedience alone is not enough, because what happens when the order is not just to march, but to kill? This is where militaries employ one of the darkest tools of psychology: dehumanization. The process of stripping away empathy until the enemy is no longer seen as a person, but as an object, a problem to be eliminated. It begins with words. In war, the enemy is never men, women, or children. They become targets, hostiles, bogeys, sometimes nothing more than coordinates on a map. Civilian deaths are softened into collateral damage. A bombing run isn't described as destroying lives, it's just mission accomplished. This linguistic sleight of hand isn't accidental. Psychologists call it moral disengagement, because once you change the language, you weaken the weight of conscience. A soldier who might hesitate to shoot a child will feel far less resistance when ordered to neutralize a target. Dehumanization doesn't just apply to the enemy, it begins with the soldier. From the first day of training, individuality is erased. Hair is shaved away, civilian clothes are stripped off and replaced with the uniform. Even names are swallowed by rank and number. The soldier is no longer John, the unique individual. He becomes part of a faceless unit. Psychologists call this a collective identity. And once you stop seeing yourself as an individual, it becomes easier to stop seeing the enemy as one, too. The same dynamic appeared in Zimbardo's prison experiment. When students put on identical guard uniforms and dark sunglasses, they quickly turned brutal. The uniform gave them anonymity, and with anonymity, empathy faded. And then comes the conditioning. Every action is judged in cycles of reward and punishment. Obedience, aggression, even cruelty, rewarded with medals, praise, or just a nod of approval. But hesitation, compassion, or questioning an order? Punished, sometimes through humiliation in front of the unit. Over time, the brain learns a dangerous equation. Suppress empathy, and you'll be safe. Show hesitation, and you'll suffer. History is full of proof of how effective this system can be. In Vietnam's My Lai massacre, U.S. troops killed hundreds of unarmed civilians, including children. Many later testified they were simply following orders. In Nanjing, Japanese soldiers committed unspeakable acts of cruelty, not because they were born monsters, but because years of training had stripped away their ability to see the Chinese as human. The truth is chilling. Soldiers aren't born to kill. They are shaped to stop seeing the humanity in others. And once empathy is gone, almost anything becomes possible. But what if I told you it goes even deeper than that? Boot camp isn't just about push-ups and marching. It's about pressure. Relentless pressure. Recruits are deprived of sleep, forced to function on only a few hours of broken rest. They're screamed at, humiliated, and punished for even the smallest mistake. They're pushed to exhaustion through endless drills and punishing exercises. All of this floods the brain with stress signals. Neuroscientists call this survival mode. In this state, there is no weighing of morality, no time for second thoughts. You act fast, instinctively, and brutally, because that's what your brain has been forced to prioritize. And then comes the repetition. Every command, every drill, every shouted order is repeated until it becomes second nature. The brain's neuroplasticity, its ability to rewire itself, ensures this training sticks. This is what psychologists call stimulus-response conditioning. And here lies the darkest revelation. Obedience isn't just drilled into soldiers psychologically. It's etched into their neural circuitry. By overstimulating fear centers and suppressing reasoning centers, the system ensures that in moments of crisis, soldiers won't stop to think. They'll act automatically, following orders, following programming. That's how a man can press a button, release a nuclear bomb, and later describe it simply as completing the mission, because in that moment, the full complexity of human thought was never invited into the decision. The brain was running on conditioned reflex. So when we say military training makes people dumb, it isn't an insult. It's a scientific reality. The training suppresses independent reasoning and strengthens blind obedience at the level of the brain itself. And once you understand this, you realize the next step is even more chilling. To build a perfect soldier, one final barrier must be broken: free will itself. Every soldier remembers boot camp. Weeks of relentless stress designed to push the human mind and body to the edge. Sleep deprivation is constant. Recruits function on 3 or 4 hours of broken rest. And science shows that just 48 hours without proper sleep can slash decision-making ability by nearly half. Drill sergeants shout, insult, and humiliate, not out of cruelty, but by design. Each insult chips away at ego, at self-identity. And then comes the physical exhaustion. At first, it feels like torture. But there's a hidden purpose. Exhaustion weakens resistance. A broken mind doesn't argue. It obeys. Psychologists have long noted the eerie similarities between boot camps and cults. Recruits are cut off from their families, their friends, their phones. Their old lives are erased, marching in unison, chanting slogans, repeating codes of honor until they sink deep into the subconscious. Authority becomes absolute. One voice, the commander, replaces all others. And every action is judged. Obedience rewarded, disobedience punished. This isn't training, this is indoctrination. The same methods used by cults to break down individuals and rebuild them into unquestioning followers. In combat, hesitation isn't just dangerous, it's deadly. Imagine a soldier on the battlefield, rifle aimed, finger on the trigger. For a brief moment, he hesitates. What if this person is innocent? What if I'm wrong? That hesitation, even for a heartbeat, could risk the mission or cost fellow soldiers their lives. As one military psychologist once put it bluntly, a soldier who still thinks too much will hesitate to pull the trigger. And hesitation is unacceptable. So the system ensures that hesitation never happens. By the end of boot camp, most recruits believe they've been hardened by discipline, but beneath the surface, something far darker has taken place. Independent thought, broken down, emotional resistance, erased through exhaustion and isolation, free will, replaced with conditioned reflex. That's why a soldier can commit acts their civilian self would find unthinkable, not because they are monsters, but because their ability to choose has been systematically dismantled. So when we ask, how can ordinary people kill strangers, even children, the answer is chillingly clear. It's that free will is deliberately broken, step by step, until obedience feels like the only choice. For most of human history, killing another person wasn't easy. Even on battlefields, soldiers often aimed high, firing above the enemy rather than directly at them. Military historians estimate that in wars before the 20th century, only 15 to 20% of soldiers actually fired their weapons at the enemy. Not because they were cowards, but because something deep inside resisted. An instinct, an ancient moral barrier, whispering, "Don't do it." So the question became, how do you train humans to silence that voice? How do you create soldiers who kill without hesitation, without conscience? After World War II, military psychologists began to study this problem. And they discovered something shocking. The vast majority of soldiers were simply avoiding killing, so they redesigned training itself. Recruits no longer just practiced aiming. They practiced shooting at life-sized figures that fell when hit. This subtle change reprogrammed the brain. The soldier wasn't just firing at shapes. He was rehearsing killing, over and over, until it became instinct. The firing rate had skyrocketed from 20% to almost 90%. But firing a weapon is only the first step. The next hurdle is emotional resistance. To overcome it, militaries use desensitization. Exposure to violence becomes routine. War movies and propaganda glorifying violence, turning death into entertainment. Neuroscience shows that the more the brain is exposed to violent imagery, the weaker its natural aversion becomes. Killing no longer feels shocking. It feels normal. But there's one more obstacle: empathy. Humans are wired to feel compassion when they see another suffer. So militaries dismantle that too. Through propaganda, the enemy is stripped of humanity. They're given labels: savages, vermin, terrorists. Cartoons and posters portray them as less than human. History shows this works with terrifying effectiveness. In World War II, Japanese soldiers were depicted as rats or insects. Once the enemy is no longer seen as human, empathy evaporates. And with empathy gone, killing becomes far easier. Psychologists call this moral disengagement, a mental trick where soldiers separate their battlefield self from their civilian self. The soldier on the battlefield kills without hesitation. The civilian at home loves, laughs, and cares for family. So how does a human kill without conscience? By turning killing into a rehearsed reflex. By numbing the mind through desensitization. By stripping enemies of their humanity. And by splitting identity into soldier and civilian. It is not that soldiers lack morality. It is that morality is deliberately switched off, like a light, flicked by training and conditioning. A soldier doesn't decide who the enemy is. A soldier doesn't decide why the war is fought. A soldier doesn't decide if the mission is just. The soldier obeys. That's why atrocities happen. Not because soldiers are monsters, but because the system is designed to turn obedience into instinct. Think of it this way. A general doesn't need to fire a weapon. He only needs to give an order. And that order ripples downward, carried out by soldiers whose training ensures they will not question, only act. In this sense, the chain of command is itself a weapon that can launch missiles, topple governments, or annihilate millions, all without a single person along the chain stopping to ask, "Is this right?" So what is the ultimate weapon? It's not the gun or the bomb or even the nuclear warhead. It's the human mind, stripped of empathy, rewired for reflex, and bound by unshakable obedience. A mind that no longer asks questions. A mind that no longer hesitates. A mind that follows orders, even when those orders defy morality itself. That is the power, and the danger, of obedience beyond morality.